Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. The conflict between Israel and Hamas is causing a rift within the Democratic Party. President Biden has been criticized by some within his own party who say he's not doing enough to help Palestinians who have been hurt by Israel's attacks on Hamas. Meanwhile, some North Carolina Democrats are facing criticism from others in the party who say they're not showing enough support for Israel, which is America's top Middle Eastern ally. The tension is taking the party's focus off the 2024 elections in a state known for its tight presidential and gubernatorial races. WRAL state government reporter Paul Spey has been tracking the discord in the party, and he joins us now. Paul, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
The fighting in Gaza first started on October 7th. What was the first sign that the conflict might affect politics and Democrats specifically here in North Carolina?
Well, it happened almost immediately after that. Legislators returned to Raleigh that following week, and I believe it was October 10th, where they drafted and passed a resolution that sort of expressed their support for Israel. It was unanimous except for 12 Democrats who abstained from the vote. Now, they said the way that the resolution was written didn't do enough to account for civilians who were hurt in this back and forth fighting. And they, one legislator told me she thought it gave Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli leader, carte blanche to sort of destroy Gaza if he wanted to. And so that's why they abstained, but that nuance quickly got lost in the political discourse as those Democrats faced criticisms that they were soft on terrorism, that they didn't support Israel and things like that, and it's sort of escalated since then.
Now, this debate hasn't just been confined to the legislature. It's also become a topic on the campaign trail, right?
Right. We have Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, who's a Republican, and he's running for governor. And that week, the same week that that resolution was passed, Roy Cooper was out of the country. Well, Robinson decided that as acting governor, with Cooper out of town, he was going to hold a press conference. And when reporters get there, they see him behind the podium at the legislature, and he declares this week of prayer for Israel and says he stands firmly on their side and their response to Hamas. And then he takes a lot of questions about some old comments he's made on social media and on conservative radio shows about Jewish people, comments that many have seen as anti-Semitic. Now, he downplayed those remarks and said, hey, they're poorly worded, but I have nothing against Jewish people. I'm not anti-Semitic, and I stand here in front of you standing with Israel. Well, that day came and went. That press conference came and went. And then a few days later, he announced he was not just standing with Israel, he was going to go stand in Israel. He announced he was getting on a flight with a Christian group and flying over there to just see how the fighting was affecting the Israeli people.
Now, state politics are usually about things like paved roads and funding public education. Why are legislators wading into a foreign policy debate? Can they have any impact at all?
Tangibly, no. But as far as their sway in appeasing voters, maybe. And on the Republican side, Republicans want to hear their representatives saying, we stand firmly with Israel. They do that. They're not divided on that issue. On the Democratic side, the Democrats would say, hey, we're a big tent. We welcome ideas from multiple angles here. Well, the problem with that is when a conflict breaks out, different factions from within the party are calling on the same Democratic lawmakers, leaders, even town councilors to say something. And so if you're in those positions as an elected official, you're hearing from members of your base telling you to, hey, stand up for Israel. You're hearing from other members that say, hey, please, give a voice to these Palestinian civilians who are, being hurt and killed by this counter response. And you're sort of stuck in the middle because it's a nuanced issue, but nuance doesn't really translate well in this TikTok issue. Nuance, there's that old adage that if you're explaining, you're losing, and explaining a nuanced position, people don't have time for that. And in politics, it's headlines and it's one-liner accusations and things like that. And I think Democrats have largely been stuck because if they say, hey, we stand with Israel, without elaborating further, that can be seen as diminishing the pain and suffering of the Palestinian people. And then on the other side, if you say, hey, Israel needs to back off and be more careful with its attacks on Hamas. They're killing Palestinians and civilians and women and children. Well, some people take that and say like, oh well, you're anti-Israel. We've seen that. We've seen this. This is such a charged and sensitive topic that it's really hard for Democratic lawmakers to thread that needle where they can appease both sides. If you speak out against Israel, you can quickly face accusations that you're anti-Semitic, and on the other side, if you don't, express some concern for civilians in Gaza, then you could be seen as Islamophobic or anti-Arab, and so if you're a lawmaker, you really you're walking on eggshells here, and almost no matter what you say, people could take away an impression that you don't want them to.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear more about how conflict in the Middle East could affect elections here in North Carolina. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL state government reporter Paul Spey about infighting in the Democratic Party over the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Paul, the state Democratic Party's rift over Israel dates back to long before the October attack. Take us back.
So for years, there are different factions within the party organization that have proposed resolutions that call for the U.S. to pull back its support for Israel, or at least condition it, or even to align U.S. support behind Palestinian civilians. And so there's always been that in the background. And then things came into public view even more last year when David Price announced that he was retiring from the 4th Congressional District. That's where it covers Durham. There were two candidates, Valerie Foushee and Neda Alam, and they were on different sides of this issue. Neda Alam she is the first Muslim woman ever elected to office in North Carolina. She's young. And there's Valerie Foushee. She was a state legislator. And Foushee accepted support from pro-Israel groups, 6 figures. And that drew pushback from members of the Democratic Party. The Progressive Caucus withdrew its endorsement of her. And it became a thing. And Alam and others pointed out and accused Foushee of sort of riding that money to her current seat where she sits now. She now faces pressure from activists to call for a ceasefire. That's where she is in all this drama. And then there's the Jewish caucus within the state party that has been working for months to get formal recognition. The state party has certain rules and procedures that groups have to meet and go through to receive formal recognition. And they had trouble doing that. And then at the first vote on whether or not they would get recognition, they fell short. And after that, Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson accused the party of being anti-Semitic, and it became national news. We've seen stories from Jewish Insider, and so they're really under the microscope lately.
Now, all of this is happening while the state party goes through some changes. The party lost every statewide election last year, and that caused some leadership changes. What does it say about where the party is today now that all this infighting has sort of become public?
I think it shows that unifying a party is harder than people think, and keeping them focused is harder than people think. And, Democrats may argue it's harder for them because they're a big tent party than it is for Republicans, who are unified on this issue. You're right. They probably didn't imagine that this was where they would be a year ago or even months ago, because after the midterm elections, they were so fed up that factions of their base didn't show up. Young people of color, stayed home, and they lost all these statewide elections. So then members of the Democratic Party, they ousted their chairwoman, Bobby Richardson, who was a former legislator. She's been around a long time. And they installed Anderson Clayton, who's 25 years old, and she's an organizer and a campaigner. And that's her strength. And so since electing her in February, and other new members of the leadership team, uh, they've been looking forward to 2024. They've been saying we are going to unify behind Joe Biden, and we're going to have a better plan for getting people to the polls. We're going to have a better organizing plan, and they've been more optimistic. This drama has sort of it's taken the wind out of their sails a little bit because it's a distraction. You know, they're trying to look forward. They want to talk about abortion rights, which has done them well in other states like Ohio and Virginia, and instead, you know, they're having to talk about this Jewish caucus, and people are leaking things to the press and putting out inflammatory comments, and so it's just uh, leading and organizing, at least internally. My assumption is that Anderson Clayton would say is harder than many people on the outside think. Now they're doing their best to address it, and I know it's their goal to unify before next year because, frankly, they have to because their margin for error is very, very slim.
Now, Attorney General Josh Stein is seen as the frontrunner for the Democratic nomination for governor. He would be the first Jewish governor if he wins. Where is he on all this?
You know, Mark Robinson, the Republican lieutenant governor, has been trying to draw him into this by saying, oh, the Jewish caucus failed, and that shows that the party is anti-Semitic. You know, Josh Stein needs to condemn them. And, you know, Stein is sort of just playing it straight. You know, he's said that he's going to work with the party and the caucus to obviously ensure that it gets formal recognition and things like that. But he sort of stayed above it. I mean, and like I said, North Carolina's presidential and gubernatorial races are decided usually by less than 5 points, less than 3 points. There's percentage points. There's not much time for bickering or getting caught up in the weeds on this stuff, especially on something that Stein and Robinson and even members of the party cannot have direct control of over in Gaza and in Israel.
Now, you spoke with a number of political experts. What did they tell you? Is there any upside or downside to this debate as a party or even as an individual politician? And also, can it hurt them if they don't take a stance on this?
They said that Democrats on this issue generally have not much to gain and a lot to lose. And so what they mean by that is North Carolina is not a foreign policy state. You're not going to win over many people by talking about foreign policy. People have generally voted on domestic issues, whether it's the economy or crime or even immigration. And here in North Carolina, there's been a lot of talk about health care, Medicaid expansion, and abortion rights. That's what we'll see next year. And so dwelling on this issue does not really benefit people. And so when I asked experts, you know, how do you see this playing out? They said, well, they don't foresee many Democrats switching parties, right? They're not going to vote for Trump instead of voting for Biden. They don't see that. They're not going to, vote for Robinson instead of Josh Stein or whoever the Democratic nominee is in the governor's race. What they could see is, you know, people being upset with one particular politician's stance. Pricey Harrison is a legislator. Earlier this year, she was the only legislator to vote against a resolution celebrating Israel's 75th birthday. And she said someone approached her afterwards and said, I'll never vote for you again. You know, and Harrison said she's tried to explain her stance on this issue to a lot of people, but it's tricky. She said it's tricky. You know, she's visited Israel. She's seen how Palestinians live, and she said it stuck with her. And so she's very sympathetic to the Palestinian civilians, but it doesn't translate. And so we could see that. We could see, you know, a politician here or there not get as much support as they might normally or as they might expect. And so it comes down to enthusiasm and turnout, as the politicians always say. And Asher Hildebrand, he's a professor at Duke University who used to be chief of staff for David Price, the congressman who represents Durham. He says his students are still very frustrated by the U.S. response. They're very frustrated that taxpayer dollars are going to fund Israel, which has plenty of money, and to fund its military efforts, which are harming civilians. He said this is a thing that's sticking with him. And, young people are notoriously, flaky around election time. They're hard to get to show up to the polls. There are all these numbers that show if they would all vote, or if a significant number voted, they could swing elections, but they typically don't. He says the only way that he can see this ending well for Democrats is if the fighting stops, if Biden can help negotiate some sort of truce or ceasefire, and there's peace. And then people can transition away and start talking about the other issues that Democrats and even young people care about, like abortion rights, like the climate, like threats to democracy and things like that. That's the way out. But as we sit here today, that hasn't happened yet. So we'll see.
Well, I know that you'll be watching and that you'll be keeping us up to speed as this develops. Paul, thank you.
Thank you.
That's WRAL State Government reporter Paul Spey. For his recent article on the rift in the Democratic Party, visit the NC Capitol section of WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.